Okay. So I'm gonna make this video in English so that I share with everybody. Okay. So basically, the objective is to get success. One of the objectives, right? And there is a understanding behind this thing. Once you have the understanding, success will follow. So first of all, we have to understand how consciousness, life, God, and all of those things work. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna give you examples. I'm not gonna, I'm gonna try not to complicate things so much, okay? So, if you imagine we can call it a scenario, right? A scenario. For example, a man in a club sitting on a chair and being sad, okay? So, we have a man in the club sitting on a chair and being sad. Okay. So, this is what we call a scenario. Now, if we, say another scenario, which is, a bunch of people playing basketball in the summer, you can see how basically this is scenario 1 and this is scenario, I don't know, 100. There would be so many differences, right? But I want to show you something. If we keep the scenarios quite close to each other, and we say a man in the club sitting on a chair and being happy, then you would notice that everything is the same apart from the emotional state. So the emotional state, it's what we call, in this particular thing, a distinction. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that a distinction is a thing, right? Because it's not a thing. It's abstract. So a difference between a scenario and another scenario is what we call a distinction. Now, when we say a scenario where a man in the club sitting on a chair and being sad, and then a bunch of people playing basketball in the summer, we have distinctions. We have many distinctions. But at the same time, we can say that there's a distinction between the two scenarios. You see, it's not always like a distinction is something by definition. We define it as a thing, but actually, even a distinction is basically composed of a bunch of distinctions. We will go into that, right? This is the nature of fractals, okay? So we covered what a distinction is. So we're gonna build up. Like, if you ask yourself, what is a man in the club sitting on a chair and being sad, right? What is this? Well, we can say it's a scenario in your imagination. Okay? Now, let's define it somehow, right? Let's call this as a mental construct, right? This is a mental construct. Now, where is this mental construct? Well, it's in your consciousness field, right? Let's call it the consciousness field. So basically, when you imagine something, you can pretty much say that your mind creates a mental construct, which is in your consciousness field. Okay. So, then we can ask ourselves, what is a mental construct composed of? Okay, so if we say, oh, the mental construct in this situation is composed of a man, the club, a sitting, you could say, a chair, and being sad, right? If we say that the mental construct is composed of those things like added together, that would be a mistake, right? So we can actually represent things in a different way. We can say that the club is a context in which we can say that there is a man, right? So here's a man, and we can say that here's a man, and we can say that here's a man, and we can say that here's a man, and no man basically. And then, we can say that those two are sitting, okay? So this is sitting, this is not sitting, and this is not sitting. And we can say that now that we kind of eliminate this and we eliminate this because those are not sitting and we're inside this particular bubble, we can then say, okay, so both of those men are sitting, but this particular one is sad and this is not sad. right? So we also eliminate this. So you can see how the mental construct is actually an intersection of distinctions. So one distinction would be club versus not club, okay? A distinction has to take into account the proper opposite, okay? Now, the proper opposite of a club is not a restaurant, because the opposite of a club is anything that is not a club. And anything that is not a club is a set of things, right? It could be a restaurant, it could be a kindergarten, okay? So for simplicity, we use the word not to make the proper opposite, right? So we can use this, right? So those would be proper opposites in logic, okay? Now, in this example here, I said that we can pretty much start with the context of a club, and anything outside of that context is not a club, right? So we are on this side of the distinction, and then we can say that man, no man, right? Man, no man. And we can say that we are in this side of the distinction. And then we can say sitting, not sitting. And then we can say sad, not sad, right? Now, if we take the intersection of those distinctions, okay, we arrive at this mental construct. So a mental construct is not an addition of elements, right? It's more like an intersection of distinctions. Now, you can ask yourself, does the order in which we intersect those distinctions matter? No, it doesn't, because we can start with whatever, right? We can say that on the planet or in existence, in all of existence, there are sad and not sad people, right? Out of the sad and not sad people, there could be men, women, men, women. You see, it doesn't matter how you start, right? This is a representation of contextual intersection of distinctions, of proper opposites, right? This is a very important concept to understand. And we can say that sitting on a chair and not sitting on a chair. You see? Okay, now, if we follow this intersection of distinctions, we have, and then we can have club, right? We can have club here, not club here, club here, not club here, club here, not club here. You see, let's say club here, not club here. So we can start however, okay? You can start with, sitting, not sitting, and then you go to club, not club, and then you go to man, women, man, women. I mean, man, not man, right? Maybe there's something else. It doesn't matter how you start, like which is the outer box, which is the inner box, right? Now, if we, for example, take this one, sad, woman, not sitting, club, okay? If you take those particular distinctions and you intersect them, you make another mental construct, which is a woman that is sad, that is in a club, and she's not sitting, okay? So you see, your mind creates a mental construct based on the intersection of distinctions, okay? Now, this is a very important thing to understand, that in our consciousness field, what we have is representations, right? They are produced in real time, okay? You don't see reality. Instead, you see mental constructs. And mental constructs are an intersection of distinctions. So then you can ask yourself, what is a distinction? Like, where is it? Where is a distinction? Right? Because ultimately, a distinction is the precursor to the mental construct. And a distinction is not solid, it's abstract. And your mind makes a representation that seems to be a thing, a concrete thing that you touch and whatever, based on the intersection of distinctions. Okay, it's very, very complicated, but this is the truth. And I'm going to explain it in more detail some other time. But let's jump to the next thing, right? Because we are pursuing the secret to success. Okay. It was easy for us to understand the mental construct of a man in a club, sitting and being sad. Okay, so those would be the distinctions. We can also call them frames or we will get down further down the line, we will get into reasons, right? What is a reason? Like, what is a reason? What's a frame? What's a context? What's a distinction? All of those abstract things, right? But for now, you can easily picture like this is a mental construct made out of these intersections, right? But then you can say, oh, and then there was a chair. I forgot about chair here, right? Because they can sit on something else, on the floor. Okay, now let's take the chair. The chair is itself a mental construct. And what did I say about mental constructs above? A chair is an intersection of frames, of distinctions, right? So then you can say, what the hell? A chair is a thing. But then you can say that this is a thing. Okay, so what is a thing? A thing is a representation inside your consciousness field. Now, a representation is a mental construct. Okay, so a chair is nothing different than the scenario we imagined above, right? So you can ask yourself, how the hell is a chair made out of frames, right? Ultimately, what you will start to realize is that everything is like an onion, and once you peel all of the layers of the onion, you are not left with anything. Like, where's the onion? Okay, it's all made out of layers, but ultimately there is nothing. Okay, everything is like an onion. Like, where does the onion start? Where does the onion end, right? There's no start. Okay, now let me try to explain to you why a chair is an intersection of distinctions, right? So one distinction is a physical object versus not a physical object, right? In this particular side of the distinction or context, we can say, we can have like a bunch of instances. One instance of something that's not a physical object is, let's say, emotion, right? An emotion is not a physical object. Okay? A thought is not a physical object, and so on, right? So a chair is a physical object, right? So we have physical objects. But then a rock, right? Or a, we can have physical objects that you sit on and that you not sit on, you see. So a chair is something that you sit on, right? So now if we just intersect the distinctions of objects and sitting on, well, we can say a rock is something that you sit on, So then what's the distinction between a rock? Like, what's one distinction, right? And a distinction is not like it's not like a part of the chair. It's more of like a principle or attribute or ingredient. You see, an ingredient in the cake is not like in one part of the cake or the other, right? If you make a composition, a homogeneous composition, then an ingredient changes everything holistically, you see. So if we intersect the principle of a physical object with the principle of sitting on, and we just keep it at that, we'll have a set of things which could include rocks, right? So then we make a further distinction, right? We say man-made. Man-made. And here we have the proper opposites, which is not man-made. Okay, now if we're in the man-made, okay, then we eliminate the rock. Okay, so now here we can have a chair, we can have sofa. Okay, so how do we make a distinction such that we don't include the sofa? You see, and the more we go down the line, the almost infinite multitude of elements, they become like this. We get rid of this, we get rid of thoughts, emotions, right? And we get rid of this, which is like things that we don't sit on. And then we get rid of this, which is not man-made, right? And then we can make more distinctions, like, and more, and more, and more, right? Up until we get down to a set of characteristics that our mind then, when exposed to certain triggers inside the, more or less landscape of reality, it uses pattern recognition and it forms a mental representation of that. And that's why when you think about yellow cars, you start seeing them on the street and you start not seeing the others because you're using what's called a mental frame, okay? Yep. particular mental frame that's activated instead of another one, right? Which is also called reticular activation system. So now that you understand that every mental object is an intersection of distinctions, and then if you take a distinction such as a chair versus not a chair, like in the example with the club, then you can see how we can also take the chair and we can break it down into an intersection of distinctions, right? And as I was showing you here, one distinction is, we can say sitting on, okay? Sitting on is a distinction that we use to characterize the chair, and the chair is a distinction that we use to characterize the first scenario that we started with. But then, if we go deeper, sitting on is also composed of distinctions. So it's a fractal. Okay, then we can ask ourselves, where are those distinctions? Like, who makes them? And all of that. Well, it turns out that everything that's happening is that you're having a conscious experience. Your conscious experience contains mental objects. Now, each mental object is an intersection of frames. And each frame is also an intersection of frames. And so on to infinity. So, nothing really exists out there. It's more like you have your consciousness experience. So, in order to have a conscious experience, or we can call it a consciousness field, you can see how the consciousness field is made out of, if we take a particular frame or distinction, and let's say we are on this side of this particular distinction, and then we are on this side of this particular distinction. And obviously it's more, it's like thousands, millions of distinctions that create your conscious experience in the present moment. It's always in the present moment. Then there needs to be what's called an up regulator, right? An up regulator, or we can say a reason for a consistency in terms of the mechanism of how, if we are intersecting certain distinctions, a certain consciousness field pops around given certain inputs. Okay, now, as you know, we as beings, like me, I'm a being, right? But my image, like in the mirror, or my mental image, is just a mental construct, right? You are a being. That is not a mental construct. And there are beings out there, right? We're not sure yet if animals have beings, you can say at the basis of them. But humans, from, this stipulation, we can say, do have beings. And a human is a mental construct. The self is a mental construct. Now, a consciousness field, as I was saying, is an intersection of distinctions. Since certain distinctions intersected give a certain consciousness field, like it's not random, it's not chaotic, there needs to be an up-regulator of consistency, okay? Now, we as beings, we are more or less given the consciousness field. And the consciousness field works in this particular way that I explained above. This up-regulator needs to have access to our consciousness field in order to be engaged with a feedback loop of up-regulating the consciousness field based on the frames. Okay. You could argue, you could say there needn't be a consciousness field because a processor in the computer doesn't have access to the output that it gives. Like, for example, let's actually take a graphics card. A graphics card doesn't understand the notion of an image in the way human beings do. Like, a graphics card doesn't see color. Color is some sort of conscious entity. Not entity, but more like conscious input, I would say. The graphics card is the precursor to the image that we see but the graphics card is unaware of the color, like in the sense of it can't see the color, but it is the precursor to the color that we see as humans. So you could say in the same way, why can't there be a mechanical, impersonal mechanism, such as like a mechanical intersection of distinctions that stand as precursors to the creation of a particular consciousness field in the present moment? Well, we can take that case and we can say, yes, there is a mechanical system that stands as a precursor to the consciousness field. Now, what we can say, what is the precursor to that system, to that mechanical system that is the precursor to the consciousness field? The answer has to involve a particular principle. Like, we can use the logic above to construct the characteristics of what the precursor to creating a consciousness field has to be like. And it turns out that even though the mechanical system doesn't need to be aware of the consciousness field in the same way that the graphics card doesn't need to be aware of the image that it generates, in the case of the graphics card, the person that constructed the graphics card needs to engage in a feedback loop with the endpoint, with the end result, which is the image, such that it can create the graphics card such that it can generate the image in a particular way that the engineer wants that graphics card to work. You see, the precursor to the impersonal mechanism that is the precursor to our consciousness field needs to have access to the consciousness field. Okay? It needs to be conscious. Okay? And, well, that is God, basically. And God is conscious. God sees all consciousness fields all the time. And God, you can say, created the mechanism by which the consciousness field is being generated in a consistent manner by upholding the intersection of distinctions. Now, I told you that we're going to go into reasons, and so you know how I mentioned a lot the unconscious mechanism that is the precursor to the consciousness field that we have. Well, it turns out that we humans create systems in order to automate stuff, right? Because we have a certain amount of energy, right? And mental capability. But remember, God is all-powerful. God isn't creating a mechanism to do this. Instead, God is upholding the consistency of the intersection of, in order for specific consciousness fields to be created, right? Nothing is random. Okay, so then why did I put this bar? Well, because you know how I said that this is like frames or distinctions. Okay, so let's get down to the very bottom of things. Those are called reasons. Those are God's reasons. Okay, so what do we have here? We have a consciousness field that you as a being, you see, you feel it, you experience it. And what is here is basically given by God. God creates it in real time. By upholding his own reasons. And what's a reason? It's a distinction. Every consciousness field, which contains either one or multiple mental constructs, is, as I explained above, an intersection of what I initially called distinctions. But now you can see how they are God's reasons. Okay? Now, we don't necessarily influence all of God's reasons, right? For example, we can't, I mean, I'm not sure about this, but there is a point that you can say that we can't like teleport or, fly, but we can influence, for example, our focus. When we are focused on green cars instead of red cars, then God is seeing that we're using our focus in a particular way, and that is a reason for him to give a particular consciousness field. You see, we can give God reasons, or it's more like he created the reasons. He created the possibility of distinctions by creating our psychological structure in the way that he created it. And when we are on a particular side of the distinction instead of another, then he creates our consciousness field in a particular way. Now, we only have so much energy and intelligence to play with a bunch of those distinctions, but you can see how your consciousness field is actually like a very, very long chain of reasons, right? Now, a particular reason is a you can say it's this or the opposite, right? And it's all about being on one side of the reason or the other side of the reason, right? So for example, one reason is that, I don't know, you are sad, and the distinction is that you're not sad, okay? So if you're sad and then there's other stuff that are happening, you can see why your consciousness field is created in real time by God in a particular way, okay? Now, once you understand more about God, you understand more about what he wants and what's the purpose of life. It turns out that one characteristic of God is for him to want our max happiness. Max happiness is not only happiness in the moment, but it's happiness across time, right? Now, he can't give us a consciousness field with max happiness because that would contradict, right? That would contradict free will. That would contradict consciousness itself. We wouldn't be conscious anymore. Now, there's a complicated reasoning behind why him giving us max happiness would contradict consciousness, because then we wouldn't be individuals anymore. In order to be individual, you need to be able to choose, and in order to be able to choose correctly each time such that you get max happiness, you need to think like God. And if you think like God, then you're not an individual anymore. It's like we are all God. So the only thing that you can do is understand more of God's reasons and align with them such that God can give you max happiness. Okay? So, what are those couple of reasons? Reasons why God gives you success. Okay? Why is that? Well, that's going to be discussed in part 2.